Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's PSA webinar featuring Dr. Anne Amalaradjou from the University of Connecticut. Thank you all for your continued participation in these monthly webinars, which are designed to share timely research, insights, and practical information from across the poultry sciences. My name is Allie Jackson, and I'm a member of the Poultry Science Association, Hatchery, and this year's Junior PSA Student Director. I'm currently a PhD student at Auburn University, and my research focuses on management and welfare. And now I want to provide the opportunity for our senior student director to introduce himself.
Hi everyone. So I'm Praveen Mishra. I'm a student member as well as serving as a senior director at Poultry Science Association. And I'm a PhD student and my research focused on poultry nutrition and gut health using like different research model. Thank you.
Thank you, Praveen. So before we get started with the webinar, I'd like to quickly review a few helpful tips for using this Zoom webinar. So this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the PSA website within 36 hours of today's conclusion. If you do have a question, please submit it using the Q&A tab by clicking the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Please do not use the raise hand feature, as attendees are not permitted to speak during the webinar, but after. When you submit a question in the Q&A tab, it may be answered in writing or flagged to be addressed live by our speaker. We will reserve time at the end of the webinar for a live Q&A. You are welcome to like or comment on other attendees' questions. That way we know which questions to prioritize at the end during the Q&A session, so please like questions you'd like to see addressed. If time does not allow us to answer every question, we will move through them based on priority. The chat function is disabled, but again, please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A tab. Live captions are enabled for today's webinar. If you prefer to not use them, you can turn them off by clicking Hide Captions at the bottom of your screen. Now, going into the webinar, I would like to introduce our speaker. It is my pleasure to officially introduce today's speaker. Dr. Anne Amalaradjou is an associate professor of food microbiology in the Department of Animal Science at the University of Connecticut. She received her DVM from Pondicherry University and master's from the Indian Veterinary Research Institute in India in 2002 and 2004, respectively. She then earned her PhD in food microbiology from the University of Connecticut in 2010. Dr. Amalaradjou's current research is targeted towards understanding pathogen survival and persistence along the food chain, their virulence attributes, and the application of probiotics to control food-borne pathogens. Beyond controlling pathogens in food systems, her research also investigates the potential application of microbiotics as alternatives to antibiotics in poultry production and functional foods in the prevention of gut pathologies. Thank you all again for joining today. We are so excited to be hosting you. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Amalaradjou.
Thank you, Ali, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you for having me and for the opportunity to share a little bit, teeny tiny bit of what I actually know with all of you. And also, I would like to thank Rebecca and Lindsay, who have been helping with the logistics and are helping us today behind the scene. Again, welcome to all the participants. So today, I've been asked to speak about grant writing for graduate students and early career researchers. So what I would like to do in the next 40 to 45 minutes to give you a high-level overview of the grant process, starting with understanding what grants are, what they're meant for, who the funders are, and also how do you develop an interest or an idea into a fundable project. Of course, at the end of the day, the goal is a successful submission and getting the funding or the award. Before we do that, I would like to ask how you feel when you think about grant writing. How do you feel? If we can take a minute. Oh, sorry. Okay, so it looks like we are anywhere from, well, thinking of it as a dream, all the way to being boring and overwhelmed and confused, right? So if you think of, let's say, writing a paper, a scientific paper, some of these feelings, right? You may also have these feelings, similar feelings when you write a paper, right? And all of these feelings are valid. I do feel all of them, and sometimes I feel all of them at the same time. So, so what I'm hoping that from today, you can take away at least one thing that you can take with you, which will help move you towards a positive feeling in terms of grant writing. So let's start by talking about why grants matter, right? Of course, they matter because they help fund your research. They help build your career. They help you network, develop your program, right? Not just what you start out with, but what you end up with after 10, 25 years. And more importantly, they help to fund risk, right? High risk, high reward projects. And grant writing by itself and finally the execution of the project actually helps provide us training and planning and communication. It's all about the planning, right? So who writes grants? Who applies for these grants? I like the me, hopefully. Yes, of course you will. So if I take a big guess, right, based on the feedback, most of it is aligned towards academia. So what about folks who work in the industry, right? So is grant writing something that only academicians do, right? It's not, right? So it can be for folks in academia, of course, but also people that work in the industry and applied settings also apply for grants. And there are different reasons for why they do that, right? So in academia, we do that to create protected time for our research, to be able to support our students and our staff. And of course, if you are in a tenure track position, you do need that to set up and develop your research program, and also to generate scientific evidence that we then publish. In terms of the industry, they write grants or they apply for funding to take something that's on the bench to translate it to actual application in the field, to show something works. For example, if you're a startup, you want to raise money, you need the evidence to show whatever you're selling works so that you have investors, you have partners, right? So anybody for that matter can write grants. It's not limited to academia. So we have talked about why grants or why they're important. We've talked about how academic and industry folks can apply or do apply for grants. Who funds them, right? Who are the funders? So they can be put into three broad baskets. The first are federal funders. Those are the ones that we are most aware of. Then we have industry funders, and we have charities and philanthropic organizations, right? So each of them have a reason for which they fund the grant. They have a mission and they have a goal, and these are quite different. For example, for a federal funder, the goal or their aim of investing in research is to generate scientific evidence that would support policy or intervention, right? And also to advance knowledge. In terms of an industry funder, is usually very timely. They have a problem and they want a solution, right? Something is happening right now and they need an immediate solution to fix that problem, right? So that is one thing that industry fund. In terms of NGOs and foundations, they usually fund causes that fall between the gap between federal and industry priorities. And it's for more larger impact, right? For example, if you think of the Gates Foundation, it's a much larger global impact, global issues, some things that federal and or industry may not support, right? So we have different types of funders. So when they send out their funding announcement, the how it's worded, the mission, the goal, and their reasonings are quite different. And it's important for anyone who's writing a grant to read that funding announcement to make sure what they propose, what they want to do aligns with them, right? So not all of these opportunities may be open to graduate students. So here is a list of opportunities that graduate students and postdocs, early career researchers may be able to apply to. These are all of them have eligibility criteria. So again, you might want to look into that and check into it. The one thing that I know most graduate students are eligible for is the USDA Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program. These are divided by areas. We have the North, South, East, and West. Several of my students have been fortunate to get funding through the Northeast SARE grad student grants. These primarily fund projects from graduate students. That's a good place to start to learn about graduate writing. There is also pre- and postdoctoral fellowship that is available through USDA and NSF. And then there are also training grants available through NIH. Poultry Science Association has graduate fellowships that you can apply for. The one thing I would say is look to your own universities, right? They usually have internal funding opportunities. That's how I started. So there was a call for the pot of money is usually small, but that's a good place for you to get that actual experience of writing a grant and submitting a grant. And my mentor was very supportive. So we submitted a really small project, was like $4,000 to study Vibrio. So that's how I started my grant writing process, right? So if you are interested, if this is something you're planning for, I would say have a discussion with your mentor, right? Say, hey, this is something I am interested in, which I want to learn how to do. Is there an opportunity? Or if you see an opportunity, go to them and talk to them about it. And they're usually supportive because we want to train our students. We want to provide our students with a holistic training, not just being in the lab holding your pipette, right? So I would say start by talking with your mentor and look to your university to see if there are any internal funding opportunities that you can help with or that you can apply for. That's a really good place to start. So one of the feelings that some of you had said was apprehension and being lost, right? So the question is, where do you start? Do you start by getting your idea all tied up neatly in a bow, or do you start when there is a funding opportunity that you see? So there is no one right answer to this. Again, this was a trick question. There are three different schools of thought, or three ways you can approach it, right? The first is you have your idea, right? You have an idea, and then you look for a funding opportunity that will support that particular idea, right? Because funding opportunities have their priorities listed. And if your idea doesn't match their priority, then more likely that it's not going to be funded, because that's not what they want to spend their money on, right? So the second process to this is you found a funding opportunity, you looked at the funding priorities, and then you build your research idea around that. But what if you don't have an expertise in that area, right? What do you do? So what I do most is a hybrid format. Of course, you have an idea, right? And then a funding opportunity comes and you try to see how well they match, right? So you always have a pipeline. So one of the suggestions or advice my mentor gave me when I started my faculty position is, he said he has a notebook, right? So anytime an idea pops in his head, it puts it down. So that's one thing, that really helped me, because you have an idea, you look at the data you have, and then you say, oh, okay, looks like there's a gap here. So that's an idea for a research project. So you don't have to wait to see a funding priority to develop an interest and or idea, right? And again, there is no one set process. Sometimes there's a new funding opportunity that comes up. Let's say the industry needs something, okay, and you're working in a related area. So then you can do the funding first approach, where you have the research priority, and then you see that you have an area of research that ties in with it, right? So there is no one correct process, but it's always good to have some ideas so that you can build on them when you find a funding opportunity. So I'm talking about idea, and idea, right? So the idea technically is what your interests are, where your expertise align with, where do you want your research to go to, right? What is the area that you want to focus on, right? So idea and interest aside, what we have to do at the end of the day is take that idea or that interest, make it into a fundable project or a fundable program that the funders are interested in supporting you, right? Providing you the funds to actually do it. So how do we take this interest or idea and how do we translate it into a fundable project? So you have your interest, right? I'm interested in pathogen control. Or I'm interested in chickens, of course, right? So that really doesn't say much as to what you do or what you're going to do or why that is an issue, right? So you want to take your idea or your interest and then reframe it as a problem, right? Or a challenge that needs to be addressed, okay? And then you want to take that and see how best it matches the funders' priorities. Why does it matter to them? Why would they invest their money in your research or your interest, right? And then you want to take that, and to that, you want to add, why is it feasible? Meaning, why are you and your research team the best people to do that research or to answer that problem or to provide a solution? So you want to build it. Start with your interest, make it relevant to reality, and say why it matters. Particularly, this is where you want to see whether you're applying for funding from a federal agency or from the industry or from an NGO, and why you are best suited to do that research, right? So let's do a small exercise here, okay? So what I'm going to give you an example of an interest, right? And you're going to try and see how you can take that interest and make it relevant, make it current, turn it into a problem. For example, I'm interested in gut health in poultry, right? Gut health in poultry doesn't really translate into anything. Of course, we know gut health is important, but what do you mean by gut health in poultry? What problem are you going to tackle, right? So let's take a minute and see if we can turn that interest of gut health into an actual problem or challenge that you want to address. If you would like to come up with your own interest, that's fine too. So you want to think about, right? So I said an example interest of gut health, right? What is the problem you want to solve by tackling gut health, right? So that would help create or address an actual real world problem. Yes, for example, reducing necrotic enteritis. You want to target gut health to reduce necrotic enteritis. And necrotic enteritis is something that both that everyone in the poultry industry needs a solution to, right? It's applicable, it's relevant, it's something that we need now, right? Okay, so, well, we have an idea or interest. Now we have translated that or reframed it to a problem that's relevant and timely, right? Now, what we're going to do is you're going to add to that and say why it matters. Why is it important to address that situation and why it is feasible, or why you and your research team are the ones are best suited to address that. So look at your problem statement and see if you can add to it and say why it matters and why you are the ones to do it. Make sure to include why you are the best person, you or your research team is the best one to tackle this issue, right? Good. Without tackling stress, performance cannot be improved after a certain threshold. Our research team has extensive knowledge on both bird production as well as experience in microbiome studies. That's good, right? it is correct that without a solid idea about what defines good gut health, we really cannot implement a program for developing good gut health. That is very true. But when you are working towards getting funding from a funder, you want to make it as specific as possible, right? You want to make sure you have or define a goal that is achievable within the project period. That is a trap that a lot of us fall into, right? One of the common things that I will talk about later is that we are too ambitious when we propose something as part of a project, right? Okay, so phytogenic feed additives matters because of the shift towards alternative feed additives. Our team have technical and practical understanding of poultry and nutrition. That's wonderful. Okay, so my interest that I suggested was gut health in poultry, right? So I have drafted a short project statement that talks about what the problem is, why it matters, why it's timely, why do we need to do it now, and why the project is feasible, or why my team and I are best suited to tackle that issue. So I will ask Praveen and or Ali if they would like to unmute themselves and read the project statement.
Yeah, I will go.
Go ahead, Praveen.
Yeah, the idea project statement. So there is a growing problem, but in poultry production, where inconsistent gut health contributes to increased disease risk and continued reliance on antimicrobial use. This matters because antimicrobial use in poultry has implemented for animal health, production efficiency, and the broader challenge of antimicrobial resistance affecting food system and public health. Addressing this problem now is especially important as producers and policymakers seek effective, sustainable alternatives to routine antimicrobial use. This project is feasible because the research team has access to poultry production system, relevant biological samples, and existing expertise in gut health and interventions testing, as well as established partnerships that enable both controlled studies and applied evaluation.
Thank you, Praveen. So we started out with a problem, right? So you need to ground the problem in something that's actually needed now, which says inconsistent gut health can lead to disease risk and reliance on antimicrobial use. And it matters because if the gut health is inconsistent and if you rely on antimicrobials, it affects the animal and also it affects the challenge of antimicrobial resistance. And then you want to say, why now? Why should I invest in this now? Because antimicrobial resistance is a challenge, is a continuing challenge, is only growing, and producers and policymakers are looking for alternatives. And why is my team the one to tackle this? I have access to partnerships, I have access to research expertise, I have access to resources. And in most cases, you will also have access to some pilot data that supports or that led you to this hypothesis, right? Which is really, really important to show proof of concept. Either proof of concept in terms of how you arrived at your hypothesis or expertise with different techniques that you propose to use. For example, advanced techniques. So one of them in the previous Slido question had said they have access or they have prior experience working with microbiome, right? So that's an expertise if that is part of your project, right? So we have our interest. Our interest has not changed, right? We are framing it to provide more information to the funder. So for all purposes, a proposal you write or a grant you write is a structured scientific argument, right? This is what has happened. This is what we need. This is where my team and I come in, and this is the solution we will get. And that is why it's important to address this now and for you to fund the project, right? It's a structured argument. So we have our project statement. So, well, whom does this match? What priorities does this match? So how do you take that idea or this project, how do you match it with the funder's priority? Match or alignment with the funder's priority is really, really, really critical. If you don't show in your grant why it's important and how it meets the funder's priority, then it's not a fundable project, right? They will not invest. They have already clearly told you in the funding announcement what their priorities are, where they want to invest their money in. So you have to make sure that you show alignment with the funder's priority. So, our idea or interest, right, is that there is a problem in inconsistent gut health, which increases disease risk and antimicrobial use, right? And so we want to take this and we want to see how we can frame it depending on the funder, because different kinds of funders have different priorities or goals or missions. So if you want to frame it for a federal funder, USDA, NSF, NIH, so their goal is public good, knowledge gap, and long-term impact. So when you say this matters part of your project statement, you want to make sure that that aligns with why should this particular funder be concerned about that problem, right? So in this case, taking our problem statement and we are framing it for the federal funder, right? It says this matters because antimicrobial use in poultry has implications for animal health, food safety, and antimicrobial resistance, requiring evidence-based strategies to support sustainable food systems. So one of the priorities for the federal funder is to generate evidence-based science that they can use in policy, right? So we are tying up or framing our problem statement in such a way that it meets the funder's priorities. If it is for an industry, right? So their goal is to reduce challenge and reduce risk, reduce costs and improve efficiency. That's what they're looking for, right? So here, the need to support gut health and minimize antimicrobial use is important because otherwise this creates a challenge for the poultry producers, right? By increasing disease-related loss, treatment costs, and uncertainty in consistent production. These are all what producers are looking for, right? And that is what the industry wants to fund because they want to support their industry. So we again take our statement, we frame it to match the funder's priority. If it is an NGO or a foundation, they have a broader mission. They're looking for global impact and looking for measurable outcomes. What will this do at the end of the day, right? How will it alleviate the situation? So what it will do is, because this particular condition affects animal welfare, public health, and sustainability of food systems, right? So it will help develop interventions that will provide measurable outcomes and will support the beneficiaries. So the idea is the same, but we have framed it in such a way that it meets the funder's priorities. That alignment is really, really crucial. And that's something that should be in the first page of your grant application, right? That's how you get the reviewers interested in actually reading and reviewing your proposal and also having a successful outcome, right? So we have one idea and we are taking that and framing it in such a way that it meets funders' priorities. So at the end of the day, you have defined your problem statement, but what are you going to deliver through that project? What do you propose to deliver? What is the outcome? Or what will you do as part of the project, right? So if it is, again, the delivery or what you propose to do has to be tied in with the funding agency priorities. So in case of federal funders, it is to fill knowledge gaps and long-term impact. So what we actually propose to do here is that the project will investigate how poultry gut microbiome composition influences disease resistance, generating knowledge, because that's one thing that the federal funders are looking for, right? The science-based evidence that will inform strategies to reduce antimicrobial use and support food systems. So we are saying that we will develop, first of all, we'll understand why something is happening, right? Develop that knowledge base. And based on that knowledge, we are going to develop interventions, which will help or provide long-term impact. For industry funders, remember, they have a problem and they need a solution, right? So if it is for an industry funder, The same idea, you frame it in a sense that it will actually provide applications that can be directly used in the field. So this project will test gut health interventions that reduce antimicrobial use in commercial poultry systems, right? So you are trying to meet the need of the industry. In terms of NGO and foundation funders, it's about the measurable outcomes. So improving the quality of life, or improving or supporting the beneficiaries, right? So what will this do? This project will reduce antimicrobial use in poultry by combining biological understanding of gut health and scalable interventions, because then they have a more larger area of impact as far as NGOs and foundation funders are concerned. So you talk about scalable interventions that can be applied, let's say, backyard farms, as opposed to large commercial farms. You want to make sure it's applicable and they can translate and adopt it depending on the scale of the production, right? So again, we had one idea, right? The idea, the problem, and the feasibility did not change. It's the same thing. I'm still interested in gut health. I'm still trying to reduce antimicrobial use. What we actually changed is who we are speaking to and what they care about the most. And this is really, really critical. And so that the funder knows you are helping them solve their problem, address their priority. So moving on. So we have a beautiful problem statement, right? And let's say I am going to submit a project to a federal funder. So we have a problem statement. We also know what we will be doing as part of the project, okay? Then we have to move on to clearly define our objectives. What exactly you're going to do and how you're going to do it. So we want to move from our project goal into aims, into objectives. These terms can be considered to be synonymous, but they are not from a grant writing point of view, right? Each of them have a specific purpose they serve. So if we talk of goals, they are long-term. What do you want to do in the long term, right? And it's usually a long-term goal is bigger than one single project or one single grant. You cannot achieve that. You're building towards it, okay? So a goal is big, right? What you want to do at the end of your research career, right? A project aim is part of that goal. You're trying to address a small part of that goal, okay? That is the one, that is your project aim, right? And that, how are you going to address that project aim? How do you aim to address that? That is your objectives, okay? So a goal is a long-term change that you want to see happen. For example, long-term change we want to see is improved gut health in poultry because we want to support bird health performance, right? And in this particular project, what I will do is a small portion of it, which is to look at what the role of the microbiome is and how we can develop interventions to help reduce the impact or reduce antimicrobial use. And how exactly am I addressing the project aim? That is the objective, right? So going back to our idea, so our overall goal is to reduce antimicrobial use in poultry production and support food systems. That you cannot do in one project, right? So what are you specifically, what part of that are you specifically addressing in this project or in this grant? In this grant, what I would like to do is investigate poultry gut microbiome composition and how it influences disease resistance and develop strategies for interventions. And then moving on to objectives. How are you going to address your project aim? One, right? Look at gut health and antimicrobial use patterns, gut health microbiome and antimicrobial use patterns, right, in production systems. Number two, identify biological mechanisms linking gut health and disease resistance, because that is the core, right? And then finally, we want to translate this to practical guidance for producers. So the objective So what objective one technically does is it establishes the context and the need for the study. So if you're able to look at gut health microbiome and antimicrobial use patterns, and you're able to find correlations between that, right? So that is the first part of your project aim. The second objective helps explain the mechanism. Why is this happening, right? What is the link? And the third one is the one that actually will enable the change, because you want to develop practical guidance for producers, right? So you take your goal, which is your long-term goal, you break it down, one piece of that you address in a grant, and then you drill down to the specific objectives that will help you address your project aim, right? So we have an idea, we have a problem statement, we have clearly defined what we are going to address in the project, and we also drill down to the specific objectives, right? So the next part is, who's going to do it? Who's going to be doing the work, right? The project team. So it's important to realize and understand where you lack the expertise or where you do not have resources, because funders, they fund the team, not just the idea. You can have a brilliant idea, but if you do not have the expertise, right, they are not going to fund that project. They're not going to invest because it is not well developed and well built. So they're looking for the right expertise for each aim. You have to clearly mention, so if you have a project team, let's say you have collaborators, you clearly mention what each collaborator is going to do on the project. How are they going to contribute the project? And make sure that work is feasible. It can be done. It will be successfully completed. And again, you're not expected to know everything. So when you take your goal, develop your aim, and break it down to your objectives, okay, who can do that? Who is best suited to do that? Am I the person? If I am the person to work on objective one, what resources do I need? Do I have access to these resources? Right? So that's something that you need to think about before you decide who you want on your team. Right? So it's important to identify those gaps. So what you can do is, first of all, under objective 1, 2, and 3, what work needs to be done? What experiments need to be done? What resources do you need? And then let's say the first objective is to study the microbiome. Do I have the expertise to do the microbiome? One, sample collection. If I'm thinking of working with commercial producers to get samples, do I have the contacts? Do I have the necessary connections? If not, who would be best suited to help me connect with producers or connect with stakeholders, right? So that shows, okay, so if I don't have that expertise, or if I don't have those connections, that's a gap. So I need someone to help me with that, right? So that is your project team member number 1, right? Besides yourself. Then identify the skills that are needed and then connect the dots. So you want to think about roles and contribution to the project before you think about names, right? And this is, the team is about being able to successfully execute the project, okay? Not the actual people and or their expertise, CVs, right? Not or their seniority. Who is best suited to support me on this project? That will make the project successful, right? That's what you're going to use. That is a thought process you're going to use to identify your project team. So while we think about the project team, right, there are some things we should avoid. One, you cannot assume the idea speaks for itself. If you don't provide clear justification of why that's an important problem, why it needs to be solved, and why this funder or their priority, how your project best fits their priority, that's really important. The other thing which I have done too in the past is overloading the PI role. I can do everything. No, you cannot. And that really doesn't show that. What that shows to the reviewer who review your project is that you actually haven't thought it through, right? So if you have senior personnel or mentors on your project, you want to clearly define their roles and contributions, right? So you want to make sure, do I have access to facilities and or data? So if I'm doing data mining and I need access to data repositories, do I have access to that? If not, who has? Who might be a good person to collaborate with on this project, right? And one thing that reviewers do look at is the team. Okay, a strong team means less risk. This project, high likelihood that the project will be successfully completed and you're going to get good information out of it, right? So, so it's not just important to have names, but you have to have clearly defined roles. For example, objective 1, who's going to lead the objective, who's going to support the objective. Objective 2, objective 3, and it has to be integrated throughout the project, throughout the grant writing process, throughout your grant proposal, right? I'm going to be working with so-and-so. They will help me with the data, collecting samples, data acquisition. So you want to be clear about what each person is contributing to. So when you have your idea, you break it down into your objectives, or you want to figure out how to address the project aim. That's when you think about who would be ideal to support me in this project. And you want to start early because everyone has different time commitments, right? So there may be an excellent person who could be a wonderful collaborator, but if they have other demands on their time, right? So you want to make sure you plan ahead. You don't wait for the RFA to land, but you plan ahead so that you can get the collaborators on board. So again, talking about mapping your team, right? So you want to see what experimental work needs to be done, what data needs to be collected, what analysis needs to be done, and the stakeholder engagement piece. For certain funders, without a stakeholder engagement piece, your grant will not be funded. For example, the SARE graduate student research grants, they always need a partner, right? A stakeholder, for example, a producer with whom you're working with, so that they know that's the direct application of your research that happens in the field eventually. So when you map everything, right, you found your team, when you map, this is how it's going to look like. Okay, it may not be this cut and dry. You may have multiple people working on one aim as opposed to the other, but you want to clearly assign their aims, their responsibilities when you discuss your project or when you put it together, when you put your grant proposal together. Okay, so we have our idea, we have our project statement, we have our objectives, we also have our team. Now you have to write it, right? Like I said, a proposal is a structured argument. That's what it is. It is not a paper or it's not a business plan. So you have to show the reviewers, you understand their priority and their mission, and you can explain to them how your research statement or your problem will help support their priority, move their priority forward, and support the final population that they are looking at. So in terms of the actual components of a grant, this differs the way they are called. It differs depending on the funding agency, but for most purpose, these are the different components. You start with your problem statement. You say what your specific objectives are, how you're going to do each of these objectives, and what are the outcomes and impact you expect, and the budget and timeline. So each piece needs to reinforce itself, right? So writing a grant is an iterative process. You don't start with a problem statement, be done with it, and move on to the next. Because remember, it's a structured, one single structured argument. That's what the grant proposal is, right? So that means each section of the proposal addresses a different reviewer question. It's building on everything, but addressing a different aspect, right? And each section reinforces the other. For example, you write your grant proposal and then you go back and review or revise your problem statement and significance. That would mean you have to go through the entire project and revise other sections because they have to be aligned. If they are not, then it's not a well-developed proposal and the chance of funding is minimal. So what happens if you don't develop them sequentially? The most common thing is the objectives, they become too ambitious, right? And or there's not enough budget. You've proposed you'll do X, Y, and Z, but there is not enough budget to support that. And that is a big disconnect that the reviewers can see through immediately, right? So again, it's not a writing error, it's a developmental error. And there are some common traps or bottlenecks in this. So the one thing that often happens that I struggle with being too ambitious, right? So you need to be able to tie what you propose to do with the resources that you actually have, the timeline you're proposing, and the budget that you have. If you have a research team, then you want to make sure you get your grant proposal to them well ahead of time, because you want their input, you want their feedback. And once they have done it, you have to take it back and make it into one cohesive document. Remember, all of us have different writing styles. So you can't have different writing styles in one document, right? So you will have to give them enough time. And as I've said, it's all about the planning. Okay, so when should you start things, right? So if there is a deadline, then you start at least 3 to 4 months in advance, because you have to identify your problem, align it, then you have to identify your team, right? And then you get to the project statement and you have to write your project as such, right? So planning and time is really, really important. And in most cases, unsuccessful proposals, they fail weeks before the deadline, not in the final. So they haven't done the planning, or they were too late to start. So that is the reason why most grant proposals fail or don't get submitted. An easy example is thinking about budget and team. You can leave that to the end. For example, let's say you're planning for a trip. You don't pack your bags. You don't plan your destination without seeing if you have the budget or the time to take that vacation or take that trip, right? So that is what I mean by grant writing is an iterative process. It has to happen sequentially, because if you propose and at the end of the day, you don't have the budget to do it, there's no way that project is going to get funded. So that means there was a problem with the actual development of the proposal. So some things to remember. So you want to start with a real problem, not a proposal. You have an interest, but what is that interest actually going to address, right? Plan early. And if you have mentors who are willing to review your proposal, give it to them ahead of time so you can get feedback from them. That, I will tell you, is very, very helpful, right? In improving your proposal, to aligning your proposal to the funders' priority areas and actually making it successful. So what it's all about is how you pivot, how you adapt, and importantly, how you plan. Take the time to plan it well ahead of time. So I would like to end by saying some things that you can do, right? If you want to, you can start writing your paragraph idea statement, and you can see if there's a potential funder. So you can start delving slowly into the process, right? So you can start working on it. You get better with practice. The more you write, the more better you get at it. And that is all I have. I will stop here and take some questions. This QR code takes you to Slido for a few feedbacks on the webinar. I'd be happy if you can share your feedbacks with me.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Ann, for that wonderful presentation. I know that for most of us in this part of our career or as we're students, grants are not something that comes naturally. But we really appreciate your time that you took for this webinar. That was some excellent information. So we'll move into the Q&A portion now of the webinar. I'll begin with the highest rated questions submitted through the Q&A tab. We have some time. We have about 6 minutes.
Ali, again, I'm not sure if it's okay, I'm happy to stay for a bit.
Okay. Yes. So if anyone wants to stay longer and we have some pressing questions, Dr. Mary Ann is nice enough to sacrifice her time to stay a little bit longer. But let's go through these questions. I'm just looking through them now.
Sure.
So one question that has been liked, it says, and I don't know if you can see this, Dr. Marianne, in the Q&A tab. It says, question as an example using the IDEA method example, how do you manage the risk of the loss of potential IP, intellectual properties, simply by how you access the capital? Verbiage is critical. Does one need to have started the potential patent first?
So that's a wonderful question. I have very little experience with that, but based on what I know is, if you already have data that you can patent, then you should patent it, right? Work with, your industry or university personnel to develop the IP. But if you're not at that stage, right, then you can use the funding to develop the IP. But at that time, that funding, that IP will be shared with the funder because they have provided the funds for you to actually do the research and get to that point where you can actually patent it. But if you already have data and that is patentable, then I would say talk to your patent office.
Thank you, Dr. Marianne. Another question is regarding technical writing. They say that fewer people naturally know how to technically write. So how would you suggest practicing your technical writing in regard to grants or literature review or manuscripts, all of that?
So, so both writing, technical writing, right? The process is very personal. Everybody has a different process on how they do it. You learn by reading papers, scientific papers. If you want to do technical writing, you read scientific papers. Nothing beats reading, right? And as a graduate student and or a postdoc, you have to write your thesis. That is technical writing, right? So the more you read manuscripts, the better that enables you to discuss scientific data, how to interpret it, how to actually present it logically, right? And how to not make it very complicated. That's one thing I struggle with, right? In my head, it makes sense, but when you write on paper, it becomes complicated. So the more you read and the more you write will help you. The other thing I would suggest is, depending on where you are from, some universities, they offer workshops or courses on scientific writing. And also they have grant writing workshops. If you are able to, that would be the best way for you to learn because you get inputs and feedback from a totally third person, right? And they are really helpful. And always you can work with your mentor.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Mary Ann. Another question that we had is how important is referencing when you're doing grant proposals, so citations?
They are very, very important because you did not come up with that. So that would be considered plagiarism, right? So you want to cite, but you don't want death by citation. You don't want that, right? So you want to make sure if you are putting in a factual statement with specific details, you want to make sure you cite it, right? That's really, really important. Just like in a scientific manuscript, citations in any form of scientific writing, citations are important. They are equally, if not more important, for grant writing.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Miriam. Another question that we have is how important is our academic background and how can that affect the acceptance of a grant application? And they ask, should they prioritize, for instance, a PI who may have a greater background within the application?
So it depends on who is the lead person on the project, right? So if I am the lead, I am the PI, right? So you make sure you have the expertise, right, to support the core elements of the project. And then you tag on collaborators who will help make that project successful and build on gaps. So you look for gaps. You're not looking for the whole thing. You look for gaps. Who can help you meet that gap? That's your collaborator. So for the most part, for example, I don't work with AI, right? So if I write a project on AI as a lead PI, I do not have the expertise. It's not going to get funded. So you want to be able to identify where your expertise lies and where it doesn't. And that will tell you whether you are the person to lead the project or not.
Yes. And then another question that we have is, if I do have a good idea and that aligns with the funder and there is a good team to execute the plan, but the amount of money that the grant is offering is not sufficient, how do you deal with that situation?
Wonderful question. This is also something we see happen quite often. So you reduce the scope of your project, right? For example, the example we looked at today, it had 3 objectives, right? Maybe the pot of money is smaller. Okay, maybe you cannot do all 3 objectives. What is the core thing that you want to address in the project? So you reduce the scope of the project, make it less ambitious. That is how you can address that. And to the same point, sometimes you want to read the funding announcements that come through. They are long and verbose, but you want to read it from page 1 to the end, because there is information in there for you that tells you what they're looking for, what they're not looking for, what is the scope. Sometimes the RFA or the funding announcement is for an equipment grant. You can submit a full project for an equipment grant. And also there are limitations on the amount of awards or the dollar amount that will be provided for each funding, right? You have a great idea, you have a team, you have to figure how you have to downsize it so that it's still feasible within the money that is being provided. And that is a tough call.
Yes. And then another person had a question. How can I approach companies for research funding? Some companies are willing to support research that aligns with their interests, but they do not publicly announce these opportunities. So how can I contact them directly and present my research idea effectively?
Oh, PSA annual meetings, network, make connections. That's how you know. It is very true. Not everybody sends out an official announcement. Sometimes is by hearsay and knowing people. Build your networks, build your connections, make sure they know you have this expertise and you're the person best suited to do it. Then, of course, then you can, get them to fund your project. Yes. So when you go to conferences and meetings, networking is really, really, really important.
Yeah. I don't know if other people experience this, but when we go to IPPE or PSA, these other poultry conferences, our professors always have a lot of meetings to have with industry people, and it's for that reason.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And right now you're in that part of the hatchery. You make connections as part of the hatchery. You make connections with your peers. Your peers are going to go on and maybe giants in the industry or academia or whatever, right? So every connection you make is helpful.
Yes. Another question that was asked is, how important is it to have preliminary data when writing a grant? Is it necessary?
Yes, I would say yes, because it provides proof of concept. One, it shows they've already done similar work and you have the expertise, and shows you how you arrived at your hypothesis, right? Sometimes you may find language in the RFA or the funding announcement that says preliminary data are not required. I would say if you have something that is not anything, but something that is directly relevant to your project, I would say provide them. It need not be data that informs your hypothesis, but it can be expertise and a technique. For example, you have done microbiome sequencing, right? So, and you're proposing to do it. You can provide that as preliminary data that shows expertise in that particular area in terms of doing the sequencing and the data analysis. But yes, preliminary data or supporting data is really, really important.
Yes, and then going on to more about the proposal, is it necessary that the proposal is long? How long should a proposal be? And how technical should the language be?
Wonderful question. I actually had a meme on here, which I kind of removed. So PSA abstracts are open. I'm sure you're working on your abstract. There is a word limit, right? And it's very difficult to bring it to the word limit. So you struggle with that with grant writing as well. They have a page limit. if not a word limit. So you cannot write about everything under the sky. So you have to make that critical choice of how much information is too much information, or what do you need the reviewers to know so they can understand and appreciate what you're proposing, right? And again, that's a struggle. You write and then you cut. That's how you get it to the page limit or the word limit. That is really, really important. Because at the end of the day, reviewers are people like you and I who are going to review it. They're not going to review a 20-page, 25-page document. No, they're going to lose interest, right? Our attention span, I'm said, is 15 minutes in class. I'm not sure how much of that is when you're actually reading a wordy, lengthy document. So in terms of being technical, it depends on your audience, right? If it's a federal, it is technical. In terms of the industry, again, it depends on the funder, right? So that is where you decide how technical. How much detail do you need to provide when you come to your approach? It depends on the funder. It depends on the funding agency. It depends on the scope of the project. Sometimes they ask for a concept proposal where you're just describing a big concept, not exactly the nitty-gritty of how you're going to do it. I'm going to grow salmonella and inoculate my chickens. They don't want to know that, right? So again, it will depend on what the RFA is asking for and what the funder is. That will tell you how technical you have to be.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Marianne. And going back to the preliminary data, one person asked, can you use data from your PhD research as preliminary data?
That's a discussion between you and your major professor, right? That's a good question. That's a wonderful question. You could ask your major professor. Because if that is already part of his or her, or their funded project, it's already been funded by someone, right? So you can take that, right? But that's something you should discuss with your mentor.
And then just a couple of more questions. So in general, what would after you already giving such great advice on grants, in general,
advice is easy, practice is difficult.
What would be your suggestions to graduate students to be successful in the poultry field? I know that's so overarching, but if maybe a few suggestions to wrap it up.
I know a lot of folks have social anxiety, right? But you have to figure out a way to connect a network. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but you want to know people. You want to know people in the industry. You want to make a connection with them. You want them to know you, right? Knowing goes both ways. It's not just for you to know them, but for them to know you. When they hear your name, they need to be able to put a picture to it, right? Or something that relates to you. So make sure you network. So the one thing I also suggest is, let's say you're going to the PSA conference, right? Before the meeting, see who's going. Whom do you want to get to know? See if you can schedule a meeting with them. And folks are usually happy to do that. That's one way to network. The other thing I would say is start early, be more active in your organization, particularly your student association. Actually, if you are more active, you get to know people, people get to know you, and you have an anchor to the poultry industry. The same thing, with IPPE. So that are my two suggestions. Start early, don't wait, once you start getting to PSA, and network and participate.
Yes, I totally agree. I think in most of these sessions that we have when we speak to students, that's something that comes up is anxiety and learning how to network. So I think that's an excellent suggestion for that question. I think
don't hesitate to introduce yourself. I know a lot of folks, me included, sometimes hesitate. You just say, hey, hi, hello, I know of you and your work, or, I used your paper in my thesis, or I used your paper to develop my methods. I am so-and-so. Don't hesitate to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. And right now it's easier because you're a student, so they enjoy the introduction.
Exactly.
Sure. Yes, I agree. So I think that wraps up all the questions. We want to say thank you again to Dr. Marianne for her excellent presentation and all her advice. I know all the students here learned a lot today and probably feel much more prepared when going into their careers on how to put together these grants. Thank you everyone who joined us today during this webinar. We truly, really appreciate your engagement and the time that you took to join us. Don't forget to submit your abstracts for PSA this year. It's going to be in Toronto for our annual meeting, and me and Praveen cannot wait to see all the students there, all of our students there, and to get to speak to you more. If you need more information about the abstract submission, that is on the PSA website. Thank you all again. Dr. Marianne, do you have any final words that you would like to give?
Just try. That's my motto, right? You don't know until you try. So just give it a try. And if you have any further questions, come find me at PSA networking, right? Come introduce yourself and we can start there. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks to Lindsay and Rebecca.
Yes, perfect. Yeah. Thank you everyone who joined. Thank you again, Dr. Marianne, and thank you to the PSA staff for putting this together for us. I hope that everyone has a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Great job, guys. You can log off whenever. You did an amazing job. And Marianne, we've gotten some asks about your slides. Could we share those? Do you mind?
Sure. I will send you my slides and the handout. The handout has the listing of the grants and the funding agencies and stuff. I think someone had asked for it.
That's perfect. Yep. I will get those distributed to everybody who signed up. So
awesome. Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr.